welcome everybody to the boswellbooks.com. Boswell Books, it feels like .com because it's a virtual event series. It is day 4,569 of us being in business. Tonight's program is a Zoom webinar, so you do not have a camera or microphone, but you can ask your questions in Q&A, and we do have an open chat. Kyle will be monitoring. We always try to make it easier for the author by funneling the questions to that Q&A program, which is just to the left of chat. We are recording tonight's event, so you'll be able to share it with all your friends. And if one of your friends said they couldn't make it, we'll be able to get that event to them as well. We are so honored to be hosting Matt Siegel, the author of The Secret History of Food, Strange But True Stories About the Origins of Everything We Eat. I was lucky enough to read this off an advanced copy that my eye spotted it from across a crowded back room of a bookstore, and I fell in love with the book. And I passed it to Kyle Cherek, and he said, I am with you on this one. We're thrilled to be having what Publishers Weekly called an invigorating culinary romp through time. The book is a cheeky treat for history buffs and foodies alike. Matt Siegel has written about food and culture for publications including Atlantic and the Paris Review. Previously an English professor, he now writes full-time and consults with brands in the food and beverages industry. Kyle Cherek, our conversation partner, is a renowned Milwaukee-based food historian, was a host of Wisconsin Foodie on PBS, and has twice been awarded the Wisconsin Broadcast Association Award for his compelling essays on food culture. And if someone could give an award for conversation partner, I would award it to him. So thank you very much, both of you, for coming. I'll be back at the end to say goodnight to everybody, and I'll be helping with your questions and sending out chats. If you say something interesting, I'll try to find it on the internet and send out a link to everybody. So welcome, everyone.
Great, thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you, Daniel. And congratulations on yet another day, that many days of our Milwaukee's fantastic independent bookstore being open. It's just, Boswell is a treasure, there's no question. Hey, Matt Siegel.
Hey, good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah. I'm going to repeat some of these things for everybody. The first one being, and your dog Waffles featured prominently. And because I've moved for better Wi-Fi, my dog will be featuring her nose prominently, most likely.
I see it, I like it.
Yeah. So if you want to bring Waffles in at some point.
Yeah, he's at my feet, so you never know. He might hop up here.
This is what's so great about these virtual events, is this would never happen in a bookstore.
Yeah.
I adore your book, and I have read a whole bunch. Let's just leave it at that. I don't really know. I've never calculated. I've never tabulated how many food history books. The measure of someone's passion or interest, it's been said, is what they read, like in bed when nobody's looking. So it might be romance or action novels or, whatever, thrillers, that kind of thing. I read food history. And so when Daniel presented your book to me and I got an advance copy, I devoured it. And I adore it because there were so many things in it that, as you said the other day, you had said you had to read 500 pages of a book to get one sentence that was really the salient thing to pull away relative to food history or our story within food history. And my wife reminded me that I'd said almost the same thing several times about other books that I'd read. Yours, however, I almost got a blister from underlining things in your book in a joyful way. So just all kudos to what you've done. But I want to know where the genesis of this book came from. You've written some great pieces in some really great publications, but this is a different type of commitment, right? A book is at least a starter marriage. I mean, you're in for a while.
Yeah, well, it's a commitment that I really didn't have a choice in. I mean, I was obsessed with this book, and I think you have to be, as you mentioned, there are a ton of books and manuscripts and studies, and I can't tell you how often, as you said, I would read 500 pages to get one sentence that ended up in my book, or just one sentence that inspired me to go read another 500 pages or another 5,000 pages. So yeah, the fact that this book would not be possible if I weren't truly obsessed with the topic. It was that obsession that, every time I got curious or, found another rabbit hole that really made me do the work and go down that hole, even though there was no guarantee of finding anything, even though that route might have not necessarily been in the plans. The genesis, I used to be an English professor. So, naturally love narrative and research and symbolism and looking super, super close at texts, but I also love food. And so like yourself, just
So
sort of a
Balzac, so
hobby.
you read Balzac a lot.
Yeah. So, just like yourself, my bedtime reading and nights and weekends for years were not just food history books, but I would go down rabbit holes and read all sorts of things, published and unpublished, related to food. And, what I consistently found was, one, that the truth about food is a lot stranger than fiction. And two, there's so much out there about food history, and not just food history, but food culture, all things food. But no one seemed to be covering the things that I was finding. And, so that really inspired me to want to turn this into a book and commit a few years to bringing it out.
So in the category of truth stranger than fiction, and we'll probably just go through your book as you laid it out with some of these questions, but did you, at the beginning of this, ever imagine that within the same chapter, within like a page and a half, you would be quoting Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and then Plato? All like, and it fits. It's not a stretch. Crazily, it is not a stretch.
I appreciate that. No, that was not in the plans. Like I said, I wanted to, I stayed very, very open to where the stories took me. A lot of time that worked out. Sometimes it didn't. There were times where I would spend a month going down a tangent I was really excited about, and then it turns out, wow, that was a great story, but it just doesn't work in the chapter. But there were other things that I thought were worth pulling in, and yeah, those vary from Ted Kaczynski to French bulldog, the evolution of French bulldogs. There's,
which you're getting ahead with some of my comments and questions, like that comparison to genetically modified foods is one of the most pithy, elegant, engaging, funny, truthful, authentic descriptions I've ever come across within this huge genre of how we have taken, really not that interesting plants, or not that nutritionally viable plants and bioavailable plants or what have you, or animals and what have you, and just kept squeezing on little parts of them until you get, as you point out, the French bulldog, or we get corn on the cob, and then hundreds of thousands of aspects of our life that are touched by corn and now dependent upon it.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think part of it is that this book is a book about food. It's a book. It has a lot of history in it, but it's really not just about food. It's it's really, in a lot of ways, it's a book about people and life. And you can't isolate food from people. You can't isolate the way that we evolved and the way that food evolved separately. We really evolved together. And so, a lot of the things we cover in the book is just the hidden influence of food in every aspect of life, psychology, war, religion, and then our influence on food as well.
So I know you said you ran into a lot of things that you hadn't seen elsewhere, but were you assured when you began the project a couple of years ago that, did you have the temerity that this book would really resonate amongst the thousands that you and I have been acquainted with that have been written since Apicius and earlier, really, right? It's a pretty deep well to pull from, and many other writers have pulled from it as well.
Yeah, like you, yeah, I've read all those texts and I love, most of them, if not all of them. But like I said, there were, I can't tell you how often I read entire books that, 500, 600 page books on corn. Um, and there's nothing they mention in 600 pages on corn that I mention in my chapter, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I was just interested in very different things. So I was just really surprised again how much has either been left out in these books
Mhm.
or just kind of lost. So not all of my sources are super obscure and old. Certainly I have them, but one thing that really blew me away is, I think a lot of people would be shocked by what you could read in the New York Times, just a few decades ago or 100 years ago.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that our grandparents and great grandparents knew about, not necessarily that they understood in terms of science, but things that they encountered in daily life that has just been forgotten about. And that stuff sort of blew my mind. So yeah, I was really inspired that people would connect with this. I mean, a lot of the things in the book, they sound made up. They sound crazy. They sound made up, and they're not. And
Yeah.
I figured if they blew my mind, and I've read just about everything out there, yeah, I hope that they would blow readers' minds as well.
Well, one example was, and again, I feel overexposed and sometimes bitter to this whole genre. But one example was the statistic that you had sussed out about how eggs, relative to cholesterol, had really taken a nosedive in consumption from the 1940s on down. I think the figure was 40%. Yet milk and cereal, dairy and cereal, when we've heard so much about fat and sugar, just like keep plugging along. Seinfeld would not have been the show without milk and cereal. And it's still, even though milk consumption, and I speak to you from a dairy state, having done consulting work for the Wisconsin Dairy Farmers of America, formerly the Milk Marketing Board, I know how much milk consumption is down nationally. But milk and cereal continues to be the sector that just like endures. How many other things like that did you find? And I don't need an exact number, but that they just didn't fit into the book, but they were so compelling. You sat back and went, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, I took more than 100 pages of notes before I started writing a chapter. So I didn't start writing a chapter until I had more than 100 pages of notes to pull from.
Wow.
Overkill probably says a lot about me. you know, so I found a ton, and some of that information was repetitive, but yeah, I found a ton. And it's interesting, what you bring up with milk versus eggs and sugar. There's certainly a lot going on there. But certainly part of it is, cereal is advertised with, these happy cartoon characters and has free prizes, and maybe if they did that with eggs,
Right.
maybe that would help. A lot
Yeah.
of it is, a lot of it's information, but a lot of it is marketing too.
Well, and you speak to that elegantly in one of the last chapters of your book about the psychology of our purchases. And when we go to the grocery store, there's a lot of egg options now, more than ever when I grew up, for instance. But there isn't an entire aisle where both sides are, the whole thing is essentially decorated with options of cereal, a million different ways. And you can satisfy any interest or fetish within those cereals. You're also the only author that so elegantly compared our dependency on corn and how it's worked its way into nearly every aspect of our engagement with food and really products in this Western world, with 2 Shakespeare plays. And that was a moment where I sat back and I thought, did Matt have a difficult, did you have to run Matt past your editor or your partner or writing part? Were there a few times you're like, I don't know if I'm stretching too far here. I feel it, but.
I just went all out. I really wrote the book that I wanted to read, but I will say I expected them to cut a lot, and they didn't. I was happy they didn't, but yeah. We already mentioned I make a connection to the Unabomber. Um,
And Plato, though. I mean, that's
and
the thing.
so
Yeah,
I do I do balance that a lot, but you know yeah, there was a lot that I was happily surprised that they left in. I do go on some tangents that to me I find relevant and entertaining. I was hoping people would find the same thing, but for me that helped. You don't have to be a Shakespeare expert to understand these connections, right?
right, right.
So for me, that really helped, make everything click and resonate.
And I think one of the things that's so enjoyable about your book is that, as Wiley Dufresne said in the back, I mean, it's going to be great for dinner parties when we finally go back to them, right? To be able to quote these things out of your book, Matt. But there were things, again, as a food historian with deep, deep, deep reading and interest that I came across that I just had never heard within the Pantheon at all. I had no idea, for instance, and hopefully you can elaborate on this, that Herbert Hoover, who I think generally Americans now consider as a president who sucked, right? Who just Great Recession, Great Depression, really did not handle it well. But previously, was a food czar and really set the standard for how we regulate American food. But previously saved over 10 million people from starvation during the First World War by his organization efforts. I mean, if he had just done that and called it a day, there probably was a Nobel Prize in there for him. Sadly, his coda was like not really managing the economy very well after the crash of 29.
Yeah. I think, look, I think he was a superhero in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
So I can't speak as much to his presidency, but in the book, I spend a lot of time about before he was president. And yeah, it's hard to imagine someone like that today. I mean, he was basically just a guy, who, short story is during the war, there were also sort of food shortages overseas, and there were blockades, and it was trouble delivering food. It was trouble giving food aid to the citizens of several different countries because the different sides didn't trust each other not to take it and eat it. So there were all sorts of blockades, and they wouldn't let other countries get involved to deliver the food. And so he went over there really as just a guy and said, hey, I want to help these people eat just as a neutral entity, and built just a massive, we're talking basically had his own fleet of ships and pirate railroads and saved countless lives. Really, again, as a private citizen. And then later when the United States entered the war, he sort of did the same thing for American troops and became the czar of the U.S. food supply and volunteered to do it without pay. He was,
right. My perceptions of him again is one of our worst presidents, but what an extraordinary human being. And embarrassingly, I think really for the story of America and for our food systems, this was a story that I was completely unacquainted with. And I think most food historians or people with a bent to this have never known. And there are, a multitude of those gems in your book, which is why, like I said, I nearly have a blister from underlining because it was like, do not forget, this is really, really wonderful stuff. Explore a little bit, because we danced around corn, but I know it's such a major theme, and you really, built up these beautiful chapters. Well, first, I guess, answer, if you would, how did you decide to hone it down to, honey and corn and cereal and vanilla, which was really an ice cream chapter in many ways as well. And then move into more of the cultural things and the psychological aspects, which are just as heavy, but like, how do you narrow down this,
Yeah, it was massive. It was massive. It was years of research before I pitched the book. And once I pitched it, there were, another year or two of research to actually write it. But the reality is I did it the hardest way possible. I didn't have a plan. I just, for about 2 years, nights and weekends, I just read and I wrote down every interesting thing I found. And later on writing the book, I found 10 times more information because I was
Right.
doing that full time. But nights and weekends, I just wrote down everything interesting I found. And then I just literally spread everything out and said, all right, I've got this Hoover thing here. I've got this corn thing here. I've got, this and this. How do I
Right.
piece it all together? And that was not easy. But that's why we have so many, why we have Shakespeare in there and why we have these connections. Cause I said, hey, these things sort of go together. But you brought up ice cream and vanilla, and that was the worst chapter. I spent months it's one of my favorite chapters in terms of writing it. I spent months going back and forth. Okay, this is going to be 2 chapters, one on vanilla, one on ice cream.
Which
and then
you could make that argument, yeah.
And then I would go back because they really play into, they really go together, obviously, because they're both ultimately about comfort. But there's also so much information in there. There's a whole pages and pages just on the history, on the role of Hoover and war. So it was a lot to pack into one chapter, but I think it belongs together.
I love the mention of Howard Johnson and that 28 flavors and the origin story of that. A lot of people don't realize, and I don't know if this is something that could be in the next book or something, but Jacques Pepin actually came to America to work at Howard Johnson's.
Wow.
To develop meals for the menu. And this blows people's mind when they hear it now, but at the time, Howard Johnson's was the largest hotel chain in America. And more people ate there than ate, sort of at any other chain. And of course, now our concept of Hojo's is much diminished, let's put it that way. But yeah, they brought Jacques over along with another French chef to make the food even better.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, that's what back when chicken cordon bleu was an exotic dish. The other cool tie-in, as you talk about, with so many of the breweries, which we're here in Milwaukee, so there's an incredible history of breweries switching over to ice cream and soda during Prohibition. You called out, I can't remember which one of our great breweries that switched to
Pabst.
Pabst. Yeah, switched to cheese. Schlitz, which was the largest brewery in the world at the time, or certainly America, switched to chocolate. And separately, I'll have to send you this fantastic pamphlet that was unearthed by my mother-in-law some years ago of them trying to extol the health benefits of eating like huge amounts of chocolate every day.
Yeah.
Just to make a buck and keep the tails ringing relative to.
Well, we in the book, I do spend a lot of time about, people talking about health benefits of all different foods, and that, modern science might see a bit differently. Ice cream, was, again, that factors in, I talk a lot about ice cream during war, and, part of it was ice cream manufacturers argued that it gave soldiers strength and helped them heal in hospitals.
Vim and vigor, and it's not a sissy thing to eat, according to there was that Marine captain or something who said it was a sissy thing to eat. Yeah,
and breweries, again, that's something super just hard to wrap our heads around. I mean, there were these whole industries, right? American breweries. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't super sudden. It was more gradual in some places than others, but Prohibition hit. And suddenly, what are these, organizations supposed to do? Right.
Yeah.
So most American breweries during Prohibition, they pivoted to making ice cream and or soda. Part of the reason, as we mentioned, Pabst pivoted to cheese, fittingly. Part of the reason is they sort of had the infrastructure, right? They had the vendors and the bottling and freezing technology and refrigeration. But the other reason is it was a similar business, right? I think ice cream and soda, they did a great job at standing in for alcohol when it came to giving us an escape and to
Yeah.
drown out our emotions.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, and I've written a lot about the emotions of food and how diet ties into that. And I was so pleased to see you at the end wrap in the connection that, vanilla ice cream is basically just a grown-up version of breast milk. And so, I mean, well, as we
that's
went through a global pandemic, vanilla ice cream sales went through the roof. And a lot of people just wanted their mom. I mean, there's no more poetic way to say it.
So that's one of those connections that I did wonder if I had gone too far.
No.
But yeah, chemically, so long story short, I get into a lot about the role of ice cream as a comfort food during war for soldiers, but then also psychologically, physiologically. And yeah, we do trace it back all the way back to, our memories as children. And that's a big part of it. There are physiological reasons and, but there are also psychological reasons it's comfortable. Ice cream for most of us, it conjures memories of summertime and vacations, but you can go way back earlier, and chemically ice cream is pretty
Pretty
similar
close.
to our
Pretty
mother's
close.
breast milk, and we get into the psychology and comfort of that. I mean,
Yeah.
both vanilla and breast milk, interestingly, they've been shown to have a pain numbing and calming effect in infants. So really interesting stuff. I mean, the bodies and food are there's nothing normal about that.
Well, it's a beautiful dance. There's no question. And as you get into the great chapter about celebration, it really, I mean, that your book just culminates so beautifully, I think, with this chapter, because we've been finding ways to embrace the seasons and basically programming. I mean, every time we have a significant emotional memory, our brain imprints with that, right? And so, there's something about the fatted calf that still resonates with us, or the roast pig, or the what have you. And that chapter is just so terrific without getting into too specific, because how can you take the world's religions, the world's cultures, and all of our flavors and, pick out one and focus on it. But it really is a way for us to relax and know each other more. Food is that powerful.
Yeah, I mean, just think about today. Think about pumpkin spice lattes,
Right.
and candy corn or Christmas candy corn or Halloween candy, and then a Christmas food, right? Pumpkin pie. Those to us here in America, those are all hugely nostalgic, special, seasonal foods that they feel good to us for a lot of reasons, and part of that reason is bringing us together, whether it's family or religion or gatherings. But back in the day, it was like that for almost every food, right? So today we can buy most foods year round, for better or worse. Blueberries are not seasonal anymore, right? You can buy blueberries year round.
Yeah.
But yeah, back in the day, man, it was a huge event. I think foods were much more seasonal. I mean, logistically they were, but I think they meant, I think everything was a pumpkin spice latte back then, right? Like everything, it's like, hey, the apples are growing again.
Right.
It's time for this. We've gone without this food for 6 months. Everything used to be limited edition. It's not anymore.
Well, to the power of food and emotion, someone had put in the chat, yes, we celebrated Thanksgiving in July because we just needed it. And that brings to mind the just gorgeous. I mean, I almost wept, not quite. Your book didn't quite make me weep, but I almost wept in the section about the POWs who were, there was the Army cook or Marines cook, anyway, who wrote out menus for a year and a half while he was a POW. And then the others that were saying, I'm going to paraphrase it, but one said, like basically pictures of girls and things like that just fades away. What we wanted was the foods of our youth. That's what we dreamt about and hoped that in emancipation we would have that.
Super crazy. And this was a trend. So we're talking about World War II, American soldiers held as prisoners of war overseas. And there are just numerous accounts at different POW camps. One of the activities that these soldiers would do to, pass the time and gain whatever comfort they could is they would construct these fantasy menus. So they would spend their time every day writing out Christmas menus of the perfect Christmas, of all the Christmas foods they wanted to eat when they made it back home. And they would hold get-togethers, and they would just all meet and swap recipes and just hold these conferences about food when really they were starving. It is really,
the paradox
it
cuts you to the quick that's how they were coping, but it says so much about food and memory and giving them hope.
Yeah, I mean, it really shows the role of food. And yeah, as you mentioned, they were not, none of the records I could find, none of these soldiers were dreaming of steak or, or oysters or, champagne. None of them were dreaming of expensive fine dining or really even adult food. It was all the foods of their childhood and the foods associated with holidays.
Yeah. Well, it's food and emotion. I personally believe that it's the second, food is the second most powerful force in the universe after love. And I'm no hyperbole there. And I think your book bears that out. Another wonderful aspect of your book, amidst so many others in the genre that I've read, was that there was so many spots where I could see another deep dive, a whole book on something that Matt Siegel was going to write. That was one segment of that book. I mean, the Hoover thing, or ice cream, or the POWs, or aspects of the honey story, there was so much there. So I think Faulkner has the line, "Kill all your darlings," right, as a writer. And how, in your process, was that something you had to contend with, or was it fairly clear because you understood the type of book that you wanted to write, the breeziness, the personal?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, for one, I wanted a very quick pace. I did not want this to be a dry history book.
Yeah.
I wanted this to be just super fast paced, just really cut to the exciting parts, just move from mind-blowing tangent to mind-blowing tangent, or hopefully not all tangents. But yeah, there were things I had to cut and basically save for later, some stories that I love that were too big a tangents, or they just didn't go. So, we've talked about a lot of different subjects today, but there are 10 chapters, and the chapters really do flow into each other.
Oh, beautifully. Yeah.
So that was my biggest focus was I didn't want these to just be completely separate, random pieces. I wanted each chapter to really flow into each other, and then they all build on each other. And so, yeah, there were some things there's some great stories out there. They're interesting, but they just didn't belong in that narrative. And, in other cases, it's the secret history of food, right? And so there's a lot I don't mention. There are hugely important things that have happened all over the world, the spice routes. But those things kind of aren't so secret right now, right?
Right. Well, but there's also, Matt, there were things, I was surprised, there's things that are constantly updating, like the story of corn anthropologically, and archaeological digs, and nutrition, and what we know, and when native peoples were adapting it and things like that. And I mean, you really had to put a stick in the ground at some point and just say, okay, this is the fact that I'm going to go with.
Yeah.
Did you struggle? Were there a lot of rewrites? Did you pull back from anything? Just because that's not a moving target like the Daily News, but it is a moving target within history, food history, and specifically North America.
Mesoamerica. Yeah. No, I was lucky. I really don't have a lot of moments where I thought, man, I wish I had been able to include that. I was able to really get everything in. I think probably the most time intensive part was after I'd written and submitted the book, when we were in the editing phase, I updated a lot of facts there just because, I pull a lot of data and government data and, a lot of data just about nutrition and fruits and vegetables. And so there were, a lot of updates to to that information. So,
Yeah.
I had to update that and do some of the math. But I think it's still current, which is a good thing because it just came out.
Right. I mean, it was. I'm always apprehensive of books that have a notes section that's thicker than some of the chapters.
Yeah.
But in your case, I was just sad to see the book end, and then found the notes actually really helpful because, like I said, there were a bunch of things that were even new and unearthed for me. I have to ask you, and this is it's you're quoting somebody else, I think, in the final chapter. But do you really think that there is wine at gas station that is better than what the kings of France were drinking?
It's funny that's a great quote. That is not mine.
It is a great quote.
I do, and I think that it's funny. It sort of goes both ways, but yeah, I think it was probably at the very least it was cleaner, right?
Right.
But
Well, that's
there's a
true.
lot. I mean, look, early beer. I mean, we're very lucky, right? We're very lucky. I mean, the food we get, sometimes we're not so lucky, but food for most of history has been a very dirty, bloody, violent thing.
Mhm.
And so I think in a lot of cases, we're very lucky in that, we get these wonderful things presented to us. But yeah, in terms of, there's a lot that's evolved, so yeah, I think we've taken wine, and coffee is another one to a
Mhm.
whole new level. Um,
Coffee, I would never argue because of what was coming out of Brazil and how it was being blended, even in the 80s. I mean, flavored coffees were the trend right then because most of the Arabica beans just sucked. So
yeah,
putting hazelnut on top of it was, oh, I can drink this.
yeah. On the flip side, there, the opposite is true. I think the tomatoes we have today, in most cases, are completely flavorless compared
Yep.
to the
Yep.
tomatoes that
Yeah.
they would have had back in the day.
Yeah.
So there's a balance there.
So taking this in, this has been my last question where I get to capitalize on time, and then we'll open up to some questions from everybody. But taking in everything as you have, and this has been, it sounds like, I don't know, what, a 5-6 year pursuit or longer, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, do you look at how, let's just stick to America or the West, how we're eating now and what we have access to, and um, is it bittersweet, or is it, we're sort of, I know we're living better than royalty 200 years ago, right? And access to things. And so, I mean, you can get star fruit, in Montana on sale on a
Yeah.
Wednesday at a supermarket for, I mean, it's just crazy with supply chain access. But I'm talking about really our palate, nutrition, or however you want to answer this. But do you think that this has been a good thing essentially? Or is it, are we losing something that we can't quite put our finger on?
I think we're losing things that we can put our finger on. And I think, look, a lot of it is wonderful, right? Like, yeah, it is amazing that we can, eat all of these things from all over the world. I mean, I have spices downstairs that I did not pay that much money for, that were just no way you could have had them for most of history, right? And that goes for almost everything in my pantry and refrigerator right now. So in terms of eaters, right? In terms of eaters, we're really lucky. We have, complete convenience at our fingertips, right? In terms of, nutrition, um, and industrialization, there are a lot of negative impacts about that, right? So yeah, there's, it's great as consumers and people who love to eat food, but there are certainly some repercussions about that, that are pretty depressing, that I do cover in the book. fortunately, I've covered enough history in the book that I do get this sort of happy inspiration that things tend to work out, right?
Hmm, that's
So,
encouraging.
and the corn thing is one example. That's a crazy, tumultuous example, but it just the takeaway from a lot of these chapters is that nature seems to have a way, and we humans might not know what we're doing. We're sort of stumbling into a lot of these things, but a lot of times, it works out. So I'm hopeful for that.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully expressed and best expressed in the apple analogy, where you were quoting folks that say, like all domesticated apples will go wild and back to their original nature, just given a short amount of time. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. And their embodiment of the American spirit, which I think you also speak to wonderfully in the book, was again where I didn't weep, but I sort of like I got a little, yeah. Okay, so moving on to questions. Everyone, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. I've got two so far. The first one, Matt, is how, where, or why did your interest in food history start? So how, where, or why?
Yeah, so I didn't have this Bourdainian moment where I just bit into an oyster fresh, and that changed my life. One of the things I get into in the book is that we're all hardwired to obsess over food. So I think we all obsess over food, and I explain why for a few reasons. But for me, it was gradual. For me, it was very gradual. I've always loved food. But history, I didn't necessarily fall into food history, right? I fell into these crazy narratives about the foods that I love. And so there's a lot of psychology there. There's religion, there's spirituality, there's wartime strategy, but those all sort of wrap up in the field of history. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like we touched on this, but another question, we touched on this in a way, or you did. The question is, do you think we eat more healthy now compared to 100 years ago?
Oh, it depends. Are we talking about the nobles? Are we talking about peasants?
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time talking about health in the book, particularly in the last chapters. And one of the themes you find is it's crazy to look back at some of the things that our ancestors thought were healthy and thought weren't healthy. But it's also crazy. Our children or grandchildren are going to look back at us the same way. So we mentioned egg consumption has gone down in the last 60 years, but our top nutritionists, our top scientists cannot agree whether or not eggs are good for us. Some people say, and I'm talking about really smart, educated people, some people say they're the best thing ever for us. Some people say they're the worst thing ever.
Right.
So really, are we eating healthier? It depends who you ask. I think we have access in some ways to, I think variety is important, right? We can eat a lot of variety of fresh vegetables, most of us, and I think we're fortunate for that. But yeah, we also have to deal with things like chemicals and toxins, and that's always been going on. So,
right.
And you can look at 10-year periods in history and things change drastically if there's a drought. So the short answer is it depends. I think there's been, you need to look at different populations and different times.
Yeah. And even certainly within our own, I mean, like you were saying, there was a caste system in place then, and now we have our own American nutritional caste system, and access to food really dictates access to health.
And access to information, and that's
access to information. Yeah, yeah. So Aaron Armstrong asks, do you have a favorite food or comfort food or holiday food? And Aaron, I think is a she, says, dying to know what the sign says behind you. First, I want to say, Aaron, if you are in medical trouble, you should call 911. But Matt can probably get back to you on what the sign says behind it.
So the sign says nobody knows anything. And that's really a theme of the book, actually, that we were just talking about. When it comes to nutrition, it's easy to look back at, not just nutrition, but our whole understanding of food. It's easy to look back at our ancestors and think, wow, they were crazy. But also there's plenty of things I cover in the last 20 years that are just as crazy. So that's sort of a theme for, how I think about writing and food in general. In terms of favorite comfort foods, I'm a big cereal guy. I eat probably 2 to 3 bowls of cereal a day. And yeah,
Wow.
I eat no sugar though. I eat some pretty healthy cereals. But yeah, cereal we mentioned, that's a big one for me. And some of the cereal, look, I love to walk down the aisle in the grocery store and see Count Chocula, and that's very nostalgic for me. I couldn't bring myself to eat it today, but it still has a place in my heart.
Right. So is the cereal a holdover from like your graduate or postgraduate days where it's just, that was a great way to, like I know a lot of chefs that eat cereal at 1:20 at night or 11:40 or whatever it is when they get home from service after they've just fed 212 people with exquisite, sautéed foie gras and guinea hen and things like that.
Yeah,
Anything?
look, cereal is man, we talked about Jerry Seinfeld. I'm not alone here. I love cereal. And I think I get into the book. I think some of those reasons why we relate to our first comfort foods, I think a lot of those, apply to cereal. For me, yeah, it probably brings me back to childhood. Again, I'm not eating the cereals I grew up with, but still the same process.
Yeah. So in that vein, there's a follow-up question or a question sort of around that where Gwen asks, can you touch on the impact and evolution of institutional food like school lunches, hospitals, prisons, etc. And she says there's so much negativity in this arena, but on a lighter note, what's your favorite school lunch memory?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, the debates we're having, right? The school lunch debates about, whether or not ketchup should be considered a vegetable, or the Michelle Obama school lunch programs.
Mm-hmm.
None of that is new. We've been debating for centuries what to feed our children. And, in Britain, there was something interesting, something called the rice pudding debates years ago, where there was a period where rice pudding was very popular in school cafeterias. And then a whole parallel debate of, manners, right? Like, should we be teaching manners in school cafeterias? Should we have candlelight and, tablecloths?
Only English, by the way.
Yeah, so there's a whole rich history there. And then if you think about just the other bottom line is our children did not really used to eat different foods than we did when they weren't newborns, right? So for most of history, children ate the same foods we did.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the luxury of having their own special meals or having macaroni and cheese shaped like Darth Vader pieces. So, I think just as we've become spoiled with choices, I think our children, more than we have become spoiled with choices. And the second part of that question, favorite school lunch memory. That's, what, I used to pack a lunch for elementary school, and my mother used to leave me notes. She used to write notes on my napkins. And yeah, that, I was embarrassed about it at the time. I didn't want my friends to see my mom was writing me. She loved me on napkins, but man, that made me feel good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's definitely a favorite one.
Vanilla ice cream, Matt. I'm just saying. Well, some connection to mom.
Yeah.
Alexis asks, what other books have you authored or articles that you've written and that we can read? And of course, we know from your jacket that the book jacket that you've written for the Atlantic and for the Paris Review and Fast Company. I'm sure there are more. Are there any Matt Siegel greatest hits out there of your articles that you've written that you'd refer people to?
Yeah, this is my first book. There are a lot of authors named Matt Siegel, and a lot of us are around the same age, and we don't not look alike. So if you enter Matt Siegel into Amazon or Goodreads or any of those, you will find other books by Matt Siegels. Those are not mine. This is my first book. In terms of articles, yeah, there was an article in the Atlantic, I think in 2017, that really turned into this book. So it's interesting to go back there.
Yeah.
And we've recently had some excerpts in the Wall Street Journal and Eater. But yeah, I hope to start doing a lot more. I'm working on a bunch of book proposals now. There's a lot more along these lines to share, and hoping to dig into that soon.
So I have a question in that same vein, and I didn't want to bring it up before because we really hadn't touched on it. But this is a nice segue. Writing articles, and I've done that, never written a book, but written plenty of articles, it has got a certain style to it. And I equate it to stand-up comedy in that, you gotta get them in the first couple of paragraphs, or else they're going to flip to another article in said magazine publication. A book is a very different endeavor, one that I'm unacquainted with. But did you really have to ratchet over your style, or find yourself starting in a different, saying, well, this isn't art, I've got to move to this more, I don't know, relaxed pace or something?
Yeah, no, my background is creative writing, and I'm super passionate about craft, and my style has always been super, super fast paced, not a lot of fat. So that made the book harder to write, right? I wish I wish I was one of these long-winded writers who can sit and just write and write and write and write without really saying anything, or tell a slow story, right?
Sure.
For me, that's not the way I think.
There's no David McCullough history books in your DNA.
I kind of start with the explosion. I kind of start in the middle. And so for me, no, that same magazine style you described, that's what I wanted. I wanted to grab the readers. I wanted to get in and out quick, and, cut all the fat, and keep the pace and excitement going the whole time.
Yeah.
So I was able to just be myself, but yeah, there was certainly pressure in terms of, doing that often enough to get a whole book out of it. But certainly each chapter very well, if I had another writing style, could be its own book, if not several books.
Yeah, no question. God bless the internet. While you were referencing it, Daniel found the ice cream article that was in the Atlantic. There's a link in the chat for everyone if you want to read that. So that's cool. Gotta love that I'm talking to you in Richmond, Virginia, about a book that spans the globe with, I don't know how many people tuning in from various homes. This is just, I still get goosebumps at technology.
Yeah, and that article, that was big for me. That was sort of me proving the concept that, hey, let's see if people are interested in it. So I pitched it to the Atlantic, and that went a long way in giving me my confidence that I should write a book about this. And then it really helped with pitching and selling the book too, I think.
I just clicked it open quickly, and I love that they went with a picture of GIs eating ice cream. That's, having read the book, that's just fantastic, with all the little stories that you have of fighter pilots going up with cream bolted to the side of their plane to be frozen in the air and churned by the engine vibrations. And I mean, it's just crazy.
It's been a while, but I think the article might also have a photo further down of carrot popsicles, which were just the wartime replacement of ice cream bars. Sure. was just a carrot on a stick.
Yeah. Well, we should probably close. There aren't any more questions coming. But Pam asked if she could see our dogs. She loves dogs. So I don't know if I can, I'll call mine over. Lily, and we'll have a small dog show here. And I don't know if Waffles, I'd love to know, I got it. Come on. Where did the name Waffles come from?
That's a good question. Waffles is not here right now. He's somewhere around the house, but I don't know if you can see here.
Oh, there we go.
There's a
Yeah.
picture of him I have on my desk.
He's got his own Instagram feed, I think, right?
Yeah, well, he does, and I featured a lot on my Instagram. Waffles, came. My girlfriend and I got him together and named him together. And years before we got a dog, we just always knew we would want a golden doodle. And there was one specific breakfast where we were eating waffles and just talking about how Waffles was just was just the perfect name for a golden doodle. And
Yeah.
we just remembered that for years and just waited until we found the right dog, which, by the way, first thing I did when I sold this book, first thing I did was I left my 9 to 5. And the second thing I did was get that dog that I've been planning on getting for years.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Once I could stay home.
Pam, I will be disappointing you because Lily has gone off following a family member who's got food, and
that'll do it.
That's a dog thing. So, well, thank you, Matt, first and foremost. Thank you, Daniel, for having this event. Thank you, everyone who attended. For those that haven't read the book, I urge you deeply. If you thought any of the things that I said on the show for 12 years were worthwhile, or any of the, just take, if any of that could urge you, read Matt's book. It is so, so, so good. I'm not at the point where I'm going to throw out a bunch of the books that I have on my food history bookcase, but after reading Matt's book, I could. So how about that for an endorsement?
That's okay. I will take it. Thank you so much. That means a lot. And thank you for having me. This was great.
It was great fun.
It was terrific for us. Thanks for everyone for attending. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you. If you click on any of the links, including the purchase one, but if you want to read the article, I think we mentioned, Kyle, I was remembering the Howard Johnson story. I think it's in The Apprentice.
It is. Oh, I meant to mention, yeah, you were so good.
So I have a link to that. There's a new edition of The Apprentice. What a wonderful memoir. Oh my God.
Jacques' memoir is just, and, on a separate note, I just did an event with a food personality about 2 weeks ago, and Jacques is really slowing down. And this year, that personality and Jacques had normally always done Aspen Food and Wine. And this year, Jacques didn't even come. And so he's one of those French and American and really global culinary treasures. And so now is a better time than ever to read that book, because hopefully he's with us for a lot longer, but he is slowing down in his career. Let's just say that. So.
We also have this event recorded. We'll be sending out a link to share with friends. And if one of your friends wasn't able to attend, we'll send it to them too. So thank you very much. You'll see more about Secret History of Food. I believe it's on the cover of our holiday gift guide that we're sending out to folks. So it's one of my favorites. So thank you very much for that.
Wonderful.
Great. Thank you.